The rain had not stopped for 2 days. It fell in sheets against the church windows, tapping on the glass as though the heavens themselves mourned with him. Daniel sat in the third pew, his hands clenched tight together, the folded letter still trembling between his fingers. His best friend, Michael, was gone, taken too soon by a cruel accident on a mountain road. Daniel had lost brothers in arms during his military service, but Michael had been different. Michael had been his anchor when the world seemed too heavy, his compass when he wandered off course. And now, even in death, Michael had left Daniel with a duty. The letter was short, written in Michael's careful handwriting. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll look after Anna. Marry her if you can. She deserves someone who'll treat her with kindness. She's never had that. I can't explain it all now, but I trust you. Please, Daniel. For me. Daniel had read those words 100 times in the last week, and each time his chest tightened. He had never met Anna. Michael had spoken of her only in fragments, an arranged engagement with a distant cousin, a girl who had lived most of her life in quiet isolation, and someone who, according to Michael, carried invisible scars no one else understood. Daniel had no picture, no voice to attach to her name. All he had was Michael's plea. It was madness, he thought more than once. Who marries a stranger because a dead friend asked them to? Yet Daniel had always lived by loyalty, and loyalty didn't end at a graveside. So, one gray morning after the funeral, he packed a small bag, took a long breath, and drove north toward the town where Anna lived. He told himself not to expect anything. Not beauty, not warmth, not gratitude. For all he knew, she might resent him for even showing up. She might have loved Michael, or she might despise the very thought of marriage. But a promise was a promise, and Daniel had made it with his whole heart. When he knocked on the door of the weathered farmhouse, he braced for rejection. The door creaked open slowly, and there she stood. Anna. She was not what he had pictured. She wasn't fragile, nor bitter, nor broken as he had feared. She wasn't glowing or angelic either, she was simply real. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy braid, her plain dress smudged with flour as if she'd been baking. Her eyes, though, stopped him cold. They were deep and unguarded, like someone who had carried far too much weight for far too long but refused to bend under it. "You're Daniel," she said, not as a question but as a fact. Michael had clearly told her. "Yes," he replied, his voice low. "I came, because he asked me to. I don't expect you to marry you," she finished, her lips curling into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Michael warned me you'd say that." Daniel blinked. He had imagined tears, protests, even anger. But instead, she stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. The smell of warm bread and herbs filled the small kitchen as he entered. "Michael said you were stubborn," Anna added softly, setting down the wooden spoon she'd been holding. "And loyal to the bone. He said if he couldn't stay, you'd make sure I wasn't left alone." I didn't believe him. Daniel swallowed hard. "And now?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Now I think he knew you better than I wanted to admit." For weeks, their lives moved in a strange rhythm of uncertainty. They spoke cautiously, like two travelers meeting at a crossroads, unsure if they were walking the same path. Daniel helped with the farm chores, fixing broken fences and carrying buckets of water. Anna cooked meals and sometimes hummed softly while she worked, though she rarely laughed. At night, Daniel would sit by the fire with Michael's letter in his hands, wondering if he was doing the right thing. Marriage was not just a word, it was a life, a bond, a vow. And though he had offered it, Anna had not yet accepted. One evening, he asked her directly, "Do you want this?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the weight behind the question. "Not because Michael asked, not because I showed up. But because, maybe you could choose it." Anna was quiet for a long time. The firelight flickered across her face, softening the sharp lines of grief etched into her expression. "I was afraid of him, you know," she whispered finally. "Not Michael, never Michael. But afraid of what it meant to belong to someone. My father arranged my future like a contract, like I was property. Michael was kind, but he never loved me like that. And I wasn't sure I could ever love anyone. Then he told me about you. About me." She nodded. "He said you carried the kind of loyalty that could heal broken things. That you'd never walk away from someone who needed you. He said if I ever let you in, you'd show me that marriage wasn't about ownership, it was about kindness." Daniel's throat tightened. He had no words. Anna's eyes glistened. "So yes, I will marry you. Not for Michael. Not anymore. But because I think he was right about you." The wedding was simple, with only a few neighbors gathered in the little chapel at the edge of town. The vows were spoken quietly, but they echoed with a sincerity that filled every corner of the room. Daniel had never felt more certain and more terrified in the same breath. He had made promises before, to his country, to his comrades, but this was different. This was a promise to one soul, and it felt heavier and holier than anything he'd ever carried. Life after the wedding was not suddenly perfect. Anna carried shadows, moments when she would retreat into silence or flinch at loud noises. Daniel, patient but not always understanding, learned to sit beside her without demanding explanations. Some nights she would cry softly when she thought he was asleep. He never pressed, he only wrapped an arm around her and let her know she wasn't alone. Slowly, trust began to bloom. She started to laugh at his clumsy attempts at cooking. She began telling him stories about her childhood, both the bitter and the sweet. One spring morning, he found her planting flowers in the garden, her hands dirty and her face lit with a smile so genuine that it took his breath away. "You're not what I feared," he said quietly, almost to himself. Anna looked up. "And what did you fear?" "That you'd hate me," he admitted. "That I'd never be enough. That I was only here because of a promise." She stood, brushing soil from her hands, and walked toward him. "Maybe you were," she said gently. "But you stayed because of something more." The words struck him like lightning. She was right. He had come for Michael, but he stayed for Anna. Months turned into a year, and the house that had once felt heavy with grief grew warmer with every passing day. Daniel built a swing in the yard. Anna painted the kitchen walls a soft yellow. They learned each other's habits, fears, and hopes. They fought sometimes, over small things like chores or money, but even in anger, there was respect. Then one evening, after a particularly hard day when Daniel had injured his hand mending the barn roof, Anna sat beside him with tears in her eyes. "I used to think love was something that happened to other people," she whispered. "But now I know it's something you choose. And I choose you, every day." Daniel's eyes stung. In that moment, he felt Michael's presence, not as a ghost of loss but as a blessing. His friend had seen something neither of them could, that two broken lives could fit together like pieces of the same puzzle. The years ahead were not without trials. There were illnesses, lean seasons, and days when the weight of the world seemed too much. But through it all, they stood side by side, never letting go. And every time Daniel looked at Anna, he felt the truth of Michael's last words, words that had once felt like a burden but had become the foundation of his joy. In the end, Daniel realized that honoring his friend's will had not been an act of duty but a gift. Because in choosing to keep a promise, he had found something far greater than loyalty. He had found love, unexpected, undeserved, but utterly real. And so, on a quiet morning many years later, as Anna held his hand and the sun poured golden light across their home, Daniel whispered the words he had once thought he would never say. "Thank you, Michael. You were right.